de esta jornada, de esta nueva jornada de Spain SIF. Lo primero que tengo que hacer es saludar que un año más se produzca con una asistencia nutrida y relevante a la vista de las caras que he visto al llegar. Y vamos a finalizar Vamos a finalizar con una intervención de un especialista como inversor en ISR, que es Jean-Philippe Houchon. Bienvenido a esta jornada. Él va a intervenir en inglés y representa una institución de pensiones complementarias en Francia, de empleados públicos, de la Administración del Estado, de la Administración territorial y de la Administración sanitaria francesa, con una gestora, que es la Caisse de Dépôt, y con una institución pues, que ya tiene unos años, que va teniendo una dimensión importante. Desde luego hablamos de 4,5 millones de personas, hablamos ya, porque es una institución relativamente reciente, pero con una experiencia razonable en cuanto a la evolución de inversiones, y donde me gustaría destacar dos puntos, a salvo de los que Jean-Philippe quiera destacar por su parte, pero dos puntos que a mí sí me parecen de interés. Una institución que tiene una declaración aprobada, una carta de inversión socialmente responsable desde marzo del 2006. Una carta de inversión socialmente responsable donde me gustaría destacar dos aspectos, creo que muy didácticos para nuestra experiencia en España. El primero, que se comprometen no solamente a tener esa carta declarativa de con qué principios van a invertir, sino que van a hacer un chequeo o una rendición de cuentas anual de cómo están poniendo en práctica esa práctica. Lo digo porque todos somos conscientes de cómo el debate que se produce muchas veces es decir, bueno, el que hace las cosas bien le gusta explicarlo, al que no las hace tan bien no le gusta explicarlo, y conviene que todo el mundo explique lo que hace, porque es la mejor manera de que se nos pueda juzgar, ¿no? Pero luego tiene otro más, y es que no es una carta, no es una declaración que solamente atienda los tres principios tradicionales de manera genérica, ¿no? Sociales, medioambientales o de buen gobierno, los tiene, pero los sociales los tienen divididos en tres, que ellos hablan derechos humanos, clásico, hablan de democracia social y hablan de progreso social. Y en democracia social y en progreso social incorporan aspectos de cumplimiento de derecho del trabajo, de cumplimiento de relaciones laborales, de consideración y de relaciones sindicales, de todos los aspectos que hacen que la S, la gran desconocida de los criterios de buen gobierno, pues en este caso tengan un desarrollo más que relevante. Por tanto, me parece que es dos elementos a destacar, que yo escucharé con mucha atención, como estoy seguro por parte de todos, y en todo caso señalarles también que en su diversificación de inversiones España es el sexto país en el que invierten, ¿no? Con un 5,6% de la cartera, lo cual tampoco está mal, incluso por encima del Reino Unido, en la diversificación que se está planteando, y bueno, pues no deja de ser también una noticia significativa. Pero con esos dos elementos que me parecen muy reseñables de lo que debe ser una declaración de política de inversión socialmente responsable, Jean-Philippe, a tu disposición cuando quieras. Muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias, Carlos. I apologize because I won't be speaking Spanish. My English is not perfect, but my Spanish is worse, so I'll keep with the English. I'm very glad to be here and I'd like to thank you, Spency, for the invitation. I think responsible investment is even more powerful when investors collaborate at European or international level. So during my presentation, I'll start by presenting ERAF, even though Carlos already said a few words, trying to explain you the genesis of our decision to invest 100% responsible investment. Then I will give you more details about our responsible investment policy, and I'll give you 3 examples about the way how it is applied in 3 different asset classes. Then I'll move towards shareholder engagement, since in 2012 our board of directors adopted guidelines for shareholder engagement, and I'll finish with a few words about carbon risk. And as we saw in the workshops, the topic is growing, and I'll present you the first step we've done in this area. So starting about us, ERAP is a very young pension scheme. It was created in 2005 following a pension law reform in France. Before that, we had no compulsory pension funds, so that's a big move for France, and that was a very big political debate, and trade unions had also very strong positions because they were very much reluctant about having a pension fund, a regime by capitalization. And that is part of the reason why the board of directors decided to implement a responsible investment policy in all investments. Since we're a young scheme, we have very big positive cash flows for the moment because we're only 10 years old and we'll be paying full additional pensions only in 30 to 40 years, meaning that we're growing steadily. And so for the moment, the main objective of ERAP is to diversify in its investments. We manage contributions for the 4.5 million French civil servants, so that's quite a heavy task, I would say, and we hope to do the best to satisfy them. So as you can see on this graph, our investments are growing, and step by step we have started to diversify our investments. What you have to know is that by law, we have to invest at least 65% of our assets in public sector bonds, sovereign bonds, and local authority bonds, which are internally managed. So as you can imagine, in the current economic context, that's quite a big burden, and we are struggling to have this threshold lower in order to be able to diversify more importantly. And as you can see, the diversified part of our assets are managed by investment managers. So the board of directors of ERAP is composed of civil servant representatives, which are nominated by trade unions, employers' representatives, and qualified personalities. And the composition of this board of directors, and especially the presence of trade unions on board, led to a very specific definition of objectives for the scheme. More precisely, it is the intergenerational equity, the preservation of civil servants' purchasing power over the long term, and an ambitious socially responsible investment policy, which I'm going to talk about today. So you might have heard from Giuseppe this morning from Eurozif that best in class is not trendy, maybe best in class is a bit old-fashioned, but we are still proud of it, and we still believe that for a pension fund as ERAP being a universal owner, best in class is the most appropriate SRI strategy for us, because we have to diversify in our investments, but we want to invest in the best players in each sector. So concretely, I guess that maybe you know what is best in class, but the picture on the slide maybe helps you defining what is best in class and why we've decided to choose that. We think that best in class being a positive screening, it provides us with more opportunities in terms of investments, and it's also allows us to kind of drive a change towards company in the same sector, meaning that if you take a sector but you exclude companies just based on norm-based screening, we think that will not improve the corporate social responsibility of companies. While if we pick only the best companies in a sector based on their environmental, social, or governance performance, it will send a stronger message. And we also believe that best in class is very much compatible with engagement, because for companies that, let's say, are near the threshold of selection, like based on selection rules, we are able to discuss with these companies to encourage them to do better in order to be eligible in our investment process. So to sum up our responsible investment policy, we have at the top what we call the Responsible Investment Charter, which is composed of 5 big values, so good governance, transparency, social progress, rule of law and human rights, democratic labor relations, and the environment. As you can see, the trade unions that are on our board of directors did a very good bargaining because, as you can see, there are 3 social values among the 5 social values that compose our SRI charter, meaning that when we select companies, social aspects and their respect of social principles will be more important than other aspects. So that's the global policy that applies to all our investments, meaning that all assets that we all need to be measured against these 5 values. Then, when we go into each asset class, we define specific ESG criteria and stock selection rule, meaning that we won't apply the same rules for equity as for real estate. And I will give you a few examples of how we do it for 3 asset classes. So starting with listed equities, maybe the most common area for SRI strategy. So as part of our investment mandates, we have 3 main investment styles. The first one is passive investment, meaning that you have to replicate an index. So what we do here is that we create our own responsible bespoke index, meaning that we provide the index provider with a list of companies that we consider as eligible to our responsible investment criteria. And then the investment managers has to follow this index and invest in companies that integrate this index and sell companies that exit the index. Another investment style is the active fund management within a SRI universe, meaning that we ask our investment managers to do some conviction-based management, but within a SRI eligible universe. So that's slightly different from the index management, but that allows the investment managers to make more selection among the eligible universe. And the third investment style is the active fund manager, and for that we let the investment manager make his own selection based on our SRI charter. And then every 3 months, we have a third-party audit that is done by VGO Rating, which is an ESG research provider. And VGO tells us whether our investment manager has respected our rules. And if the views of the ESG research provider and the investment manager varies, then we will discuss with the investment manager to understand why he has invested or not in such or such companies. Now looking at multi-asset management. So what we do is that we ask our multi-asset manager to investigate the SRI capabilities of the underlying fund managers. We ask them to investigate the ESG stock selection rules that are applied by the fund managers, and also we ask them to obtain ESG ratings for the underlying issuers that are part of the fund. So that was quite new to us because, as you can see on the graph, we have a rather indirect control on the stocks that integrate our fund of funds. But to us, asking the multi-asset managers to respect these rules was a good assurance for the respect of our SRI policy. Now, finally, looking at real estate, what we've done is that we have created what we call a 2-level best-in-class SRI strategy, meaning that our investment managers investing in real estate will have to compare buildings by asset category, meaning that we will ask our investment managers to compare building for offices between themselves and try to buy the best buildings among this asset category, meaning that we won't be comparing a shopping mall with housing or with offices. We want the investment managers to compare those buildings on ESG criteria, but within the same category. And we have added a dynamic approach, meaning that when we invest in a building, we want to know the potential for improvement, meaning that if you buy, let's say, a shopping mall, but you know that by doing thermic works and energy works, you would be able to improve the carbon footprint of the assets. So that was also an innovation that we've created. Now, shareholder engagement. So for us, it has been a natural continuation after a few years implementing our best-in-class strategies across asset classes. But after some point, we believe that we have to have more influence on companies in which we invested, even though this management, again, is done indirectly, meaning we have investment managers who are the shareholders on behalf of the pension scheme. But despite this indirect influence, we thought that we could still impose some constraints on our investment managers by adopting shareholder guidelines, which are composed mainly of a voting policy, which we update on an annual basis. So we provide each year the voting policy to investment managers, and investment managers then communicate the voting policy to issuers that are to be found in the funds. And we want them to apply this voting policy, and for a limited number of companies that we follow, we control that the investment managers has well understood our voting policy, and we discuss the voting recommendations with them. Besides the voting policy, we now also participate in different collaborative engagement initiatives, such as the IIGCC, the Institutional Investor Group on Climate Change, the PRI Clearinghouse, where you are able to gather with other investors and engage with companies on ESG topics, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and last year we were part of the investor statement led by ICCR in the US on Bangladesh, and that was really interesting to have Christina talking about it earlier, because we believe, so we were around 220 investors to sign this statement and then to engage with companies that were involved through their supply chain in Bangladesh. And in particular, we did a lot of engagement with companies that were refusing to sign the international accord, so the trade union accord that was managed by Industrial. And we very much believe that for certain companies, we had some influence in having them sign the accord on Bangladesh. In particular, Adidas at the beginning was very reluctant to sign the accord, and after some weeks of discussion, they eventually signed the accord and contributed to the inspections. So regarding our voting policy, I wanted to share with you a few key positions. So as you can see on the slide, so our voting policy is a document that makes around 40 pages, but let's say the strongest positions are to be found on this slide. The first one is on executive remuneration. So when voting, we apply a salary cap for executives. So the salary cap is 100 times the country minimum wage of where the company is headquartered, or 50 times the company median salary. So in France, that's about 1.7 million euros per year. So as you can imagine, we voted against almost all executive remuneration of the largest listed stocks. But our trustees think it's a very important message that has to be sent. Some people may discuss that because when you vote against almost any executive remuneration, it's maybe hard to have a dialogue with companies, but we think that having a figure like 100 times is already a strong message, and we can see that in countries like the UK, the trade union committee advised a threshold that is 30 times the median salary. So we can see that we are above some other investors. The second key position is about the sustainable dividend, and for me it's the most interesting position in the voting policy of ERAF, meaning that we may vote against the dividend if, for instance, the pay ratio is too high in a sector context. So the pay ratio is the share of profits that is distributed to shareholders. If the gearing ratio is too high, we would also vote against. So if the company's debt is too high compared with the future investment he would have to make and to be able to continue growing, we may vote against the dividend. Another interesting position is that if the dividend per share is increasing very fast compared to the increase of wages in the company, we would also vote against, because we believe that there should be a certain homogeneity between the increase of dividend and the increase of wages, because if dividends are here, it's also because of the workers, so we think that there should be homogeneity in this growth. And finally, we may vote against the dividend if the dividend per share has increased while the company has cut a significant number of jobs during the last year, meaning that we don't want the dividends to be made on the back of workers being fired by the company. We also promote very much the women at board level. In 2014, we recommended to have at least 25% of women at board level, meaning that when a candidate, a male candidate was proposed at the board election, and if the share of women on board was below 25%, we were voting against the male candidate. And next year, we'll have a threshold at 30%. And eventually, another aspect is that this year, for banks, we ask banks to provide a country-by-country financial reporting. So in France, next year, this will be compulsory for banks. But in 2014, we started the banks to be ahead of legislation. And next year, we will extend this recommendation to all European banks. The idea behind being that country-by-country financial reporting is very helpful in determining the level of tax avoidance by financial companies. And finally, a last point I wanted to discuss with you is climate change and why climate change matters to ERAF. The main reason is that we are a pension fund. As I told you, we are a young scheme. We'll be paying pension in 30 to 40 years. That means that we very much have to care for the long term when investing. And what we know for climate change is that the current growing GHG emissions, so since industrial revolutions, but even more since the last 40 years, have led to an increased level of global temperatures. This level, as we discussed earlier through the workshops, is unsustainable, meaning that if we don't manage to limit the increase in temperatures to 2 degrees, we will have irreversible impacts, and this will affect all of us, and especially the next generation. And that's very important for a pension fund. And we also talk about this carbon budget that should not be exceeded, meaning that at the end of the day, we'll have to transfer some part of the capital from fossil fuels industry towards renewable energy and energy efficiency products. So it's a long step, and as we know, there is no international regulation, and the EU ETS has not worked very well so far. But we can still today measure some part of our exposition to carbon emissions. So that's the carbon footprint. So what we did earlier this year is that we asked Trucost to measure the carbon footprint of our listed equities. And the first idea was to measure the impact of our best-in-class strategy, to know whether this best-in-class strategy was allowing us to reduce our carbon emissions compared with the market, with an index. And the results were that the carbon intensity of our listed equity portfolio was 19% lower than the index. And this is explained by 2/3 by the stock selection rules, meaning by the best-in-class rules. And as you know, the best-in-class rule is based on environmental, social, and governance aspects, so it's difficult to isolate the carbon aspect within the global picture, but still the results was interesting. But what this result does not tell us is whether this minus 19% is sufficient to, in a scenario that would limit increase in temperatures to 2 degrees. So that's the next step, and that's where the R&D is currently needed. Another action we took recently is to lower the carbon intensity of an index management portfolio. So we had our ESG index, which is managed by our investment managers, and we asked the investment manager to try reducing the carbon emissions without increasing too much the tracking error and having the same financial performance. So what they did is that they exclude the 5% most carbon intensive issuers in the index, and within each sector, they exclude the 20% most carbon incentives issuers of the index. And the result is that the carbon intensity reduces by 40%, which is great, which is better than what we achieved through our carbon footprint. But as I said earlier, this is not enough because that does not tell us whether this is compliant with climate-friendly scenarios. So my last message would be for all of you, because I think it's really important that institutional investors disclose their portfolio carbon footprint, because even though, as I said, we need more metrics, more innovative metrics to measure our alignment to climate-friendly scenarios, but carbon footprinting is a very important step, and it sends also a strong message to companies. The other things investors can do is collaborate with other investors, either through the PRI or even individually, to ask companies what are their carbon strategy and how their business model will fit in a climate-friendly scenario, if it would fit ever. And the last one is to support R&D to develop tools and benchmarks to allow investors measuring the consistency of their investment strategy with climate-friendly scenarios. There are different initiatives going on through the UNEP FI, through the PRI, or through the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative. And I invite you to contact them at least to discuss the topic. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to discuss.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias por tu intervención. Yo creo que muy interesante. Y tenemos 5 minutitos para alguna pregunta que se quiera plantear. Como ven, nuestro ponente es un especialista en la materia. Trabajó en Vigeo como analista senior antes de estar en en la institución con la que viene hoy, la institución de empleados públicos francesa de pensiones complementarias. Y yo creo que ha tocado varios temas de interés, con lo cual abrimos un turno de preguntas. Si alguien quiere plantear cualquier cuestión. ¿No? ¿Ni sobre la huella de carbono siquiera? Sí. Venga.
Hi, my question is about governance. I was curious about your board diversity threshold level. And you said it's going to go up from 25 to 30%. Can you talk a little bit about the fundamental restrictions to that? Like, what about not having enough women available for these positions?
¿Hay alguna otra pregunta? ¿No? ¿Seguro? Bueno, yo incorporo una, Jean-Philippe, que sí me gustaría, aparte de contestar a la pregunta en materia de género que se acaba de plantear, que me parece relevante, a mí me gustaría también que nos explicaras esa auditoría periódica que hacéis de los gestores de inversión. Me gustaría que nos explicaras un poco más en qué consiste, es decir, hay unas reglas, hay unos gestores, y con qué periodicidad, de qué manera lo hacéis. Y segundo, me gustaría también que nos explicaras cuáles son las líneas de comunicación de esa rendición de cuentas anual que hacéis, si la orientáis a los partícipes cotizantes, a las personas, a empleadores, si hacéis publicación, un poco en qué términos hacéis esa rendición anual de cuentas a la sociedad del cumplimiento de los criterios de inversión socialmente responsable.
Yes. So regarding the first question, we thought that 25% was really a minimum for all companies, even though we know that some cultural contexts may lead to different levels, averages, at least in terms of women at board level. The answer we get from companies is usually the same, saying that there are enough women that would fit their requirements. We think that this is wrong. We think that they should change, and there are lots of very brilliant women available, and maybe more importantly, more independent than they are currently, because we think independence is also a very big topic for governance. The problem we see today, at least for France, is that so in France we've seen more women at board level, meaning that we are above 30% for the CAC 40, so the 40 biggest companies in France. But we still see when the board is proposing a woman on board, is that many of them are actually women that are already board members of many companies among the 40 biggest companies. And that's a big problem for us, and we try to balance the two when we have this kind of cases. Regarding the second question, so every 3 months we receive a report from VGO. It gives us both a global picture and as well as a picture at fund level, where we can measure so the performance in terms of scoring over 100 of companies that are in our portfolios, as well as on the 5 big values that the board of directors has defined, and then we can also see the trend over time. But the most interesting part is looking at the company level, and companies that are either on the threshold, meaning that they're close to be integrated in our universe, or they are close to be excluded. And these companies are very interesting in terms of shareholder engagement, because we think we can influence them. But the difficult part also, I must say, is that we work through delegated asset management, so this is imposed to us. So it means that we have the discussion with the investment managers, which then have to discuss with the companies. And we get a reporting from our asset managers, but sometimes this indirect process is a bit frustrating. And some asset managers are also better in engaging than others, and some asset managers are more reluctant than others with engaging. So we mostly have to be sure that they do what we ask them. And because what's also frustrating is that it's what we call the discretionary investment management, meaning that when I'm talking about the voting policy, normally the investment managers are responsible for the votes. Even though they have to apply our voting policy, they are the ones responsible for our votes. But so what we do is that for a limited number of companies, that was 60 last year, we discuss with them. Sometimes the discussion is a bit tough about the way they interpret our voting policy. And what we don't know, or we know less, is the way our voting policy is applied for companies, but for which we have no time to do the analysis ourselves. And finally, regarding your last point on the communication, so we have an annual report where each year, since almost the beginning, we publish the audit that are done by VGO, which shows our compliance with our principles. But what we changed last year is that it's also a kind of a move and a trend in responsible investment. We see from Giuseppe's presentation this morning that impact investing is growing, even though it remains minor. But there is a big ask for this kind of investment, because as of today, SRI has not proven that it has a big impact on the environment and society. We know that we select the best company based on ESG performance that is provided by ESG research providers. But now there is a need for concrete metrics that will tell us that SRI is beneficial to society. And our decision to do the carbon footprint was part of that, because it's a concrete metric. You know your emissions, you know what you finance, and you know if you do better than the market. And that's the first step. And we very much want to go in this direction. We would like to do the same, but on employment creation, but it's very difficult because the metric is less available than CO2 emissions. So in a few words, what we would like is to know whether we invest in companies that are creating jobs. And truly, being an analyst 2 years ago, I can tell you that it's very difficult to have the information on the restructuring, the new recruitments. But that's the kind of metrics we want to measure in the future, and we want to communicate to our beneficiaries. For the first 10 years, the main purpose of our communication was to be known by that ERAF was known by our beneficiaries. And we know all the 4.5 million beneficiaries do not know that ERAF exists. So that was our first main objective. The second will be to prove the effects, the positive effects of responsible investment.
Pues muchas gracias. Yo creo que tenemos que agradecer a Jean-Philippe Rouchon la intervención y lo que nos muestra, ¿no? Creo que es un ejemplo, un modelo a seguir. Vuelvo a situar la atención sobre esa definición de los criterios sociales, con ese desglose, derechos humanos, clásico, pero de democracia social, progreso social, con lo que tiene dentro de formación, de salud laboral, de elementos de libertad de afiliación, libertad sindical, elementos fundamentales y que desgraciadamente no siempre se ven reconocidos. Y yo creo que es algo de lo que tenemos que fijarnos. Creo que los gestores que están aquí, gestores y gestoras, representantes en instituciones de previsión social complementaria, debemos ver este tipo de ejemplos e insistir en ellos. Otra cosa es un país como España, en el que la responsabilidad social es una necesidad evidente que nos afecta a todos absolutamente a todos y que los que tenemos un compromiso para evitar prácticas indeseables y fomentar las prácticas socialmente responsables, lo que tenemos que hacer es demostrarlo como el movimiento andando, ¿no? En nuestro caso lo intentamos, en el de todos los que pertenecemos a SpainShift también, y parece razonable que así se haga.